stop recording?
Nope, you're good now. Yep, it's recording. You're good.
Okay, great. Do I need my speaker, my Zach stuff?
You can turn your sound on, yeah. That's fine.
Should move-
Just go to the left. Then I turn it back up.
The screen should go down. There it goes. So we're post-lunch, and rather than do another neurofeedback, we could do another neurofeedback. I think this is a bit. Did you want to be a subject for neurofeedback?
Yes. For sure.
Okay, let me go over a couple things. Huh? For sure. So we have another subject to demonstrate neurofeedback, because is a good way to learn about neurofeedback is just do it yourself, in addition to doing it with other people. But before we do, I want to go over NF1 and NF2 a little bit more so people can understand it a little bit better. So I'm going to run the playback an EEG, which is available in anytime you want, and it's also available in the demo mode. So we're going to do setup and monitor. Well, actually, I think just do the demo, right? It's selected. Anyway, we'll run this. And questions came up about these different options. Particularly, let's take a look at NF1, which is surface neurofeedback. And one of the advantages of surface neurofeedback is you can use this on a 1-channel, 2-channel, 4-channel, or a 19-channel system. Now, the time it takes to put electrodes on and get everything working with a 4-channel system is really not that much faster than putting a cap on. A cap may be 5 minutes longer, but when you get good at it, it's quite fast. You get more accuracy with the cap, and also you can look at the sources of the EEG and brain networks linked to symptoms. Because at the surface, if all the Brodmann areas deep inside your brain are generating EEG, and it's all mixed together at the surface. So it's not specific, it's not anatomically specific. There is some anatomical specificity with C3 and C4 because it's a sensory motor cortex, and that's where SMR was developed. And in that case, there is the substantia nigra goes through the thalamus and projects directly to the motor cortex. And that's where you get dopamine, and it's a rather focal system because it's the motor cortex, but there's a lot more in the brain than just the motor cortex. You got, like in PTSD, the motor cortex has got nothing to do with that. The amygdala does. People with memory problems, motor cortex has nothing to do with memory, but hippocampus does. Hyperactivity is not the motor cortex, and also the attention network for both the dorsal and the ventral attention network. So you're limited if you're just going to do the surface. You're not going to get as good a clinical outcome. But at least you will be helping subjects, especially if you use Z-scores. If you just use raw scores, then we're thrown into that era of 80 to 120 sessions over 2 years before you see any change. That's the history of EEG biofeedback. When I joined ISNR, we looked at the scientific literature. There weren't that many papers, but 100 sessions is fairly common. And now you get the Department of Defense, it's 10 sessions. They get good clinical outcome. And why? Because they're not just working at the surface with 2 channels or 4 channels. They're drilling down to the parts of the brain that are dysregulated and responsible for the patient's problem. But in any case, it's good to learn about this system, and you have a lot of options. So I mentioned relative power as a percentage of the whole, and so you actually are not. You may think that you're reinforcing theta, but as you reinforce theta to go down, let's say, then beta is going to go up because it's a percentage of the total. So you literally will be modifying the brain, making it worse, potentially, with relative power. And then power ratios are extremely limited because if you have theta and beta, and the ratio gets high, that could be because the theta is going low, but let's say the theta is going high, and the beta is going low. Now you got high theta, and the ratio is high, but you don't know which of the two it is. It could be theta, it could be beta. Which direction is one's going up, the other one's going down. Which one's going down? Which one's going up? Because it's a ratio you don't know. Amplitude asymmetries dealing with power and with asymmetry between left and right hemisphere, or any, particularly the left and right hemisphere, but everything's with respect to a normative database. So that has some validity. So does coherence, absolute phase, and phase shift and phase lock. Now, earlier I was showing that phase shift and phase lock are fundamental to coherence, for example, because coherence is really made up of phase shift and phase lock. Coherence is a measure, it's correlated about 0.8 or so coherence to phase lock, because coherence is the phase lock increases in time, then coherence is going to go up. As phase lock gets shorter, coherence is going to go down. But you don't see phase shift at all with coherence. It's actually negatively related in one of our publications. Let me see if I can quickly find it. If you go to scientific articles, and by the way, I published this paper comparing the difference between average reference, current source density, and linked errors for a single reference. And I'll just quickly show you why you don't want to be doing average reference. And what I did is I simulated the noise and everything. And you see that as you increase the noise, this is coherence on this axis, it goes down because these two things are not talking to each other. And here's the jiggling phase. So it just mathematically did that. But in the case of the average reference, it always just does this. It just goes to zero. It doesn't have any relationship. See here, this is coherence with 2 sine waves. And so the coherence equals 1. It's 100%. Now, as I added noise to one of the sine waves, you can see up here, then coherence goes down. Here, coherence equals 1. Here, coherence is now I added noise to one of the channels. And when you do, coherence goes down like it should. And it goes down systematically. This is a linear function, a systematic linear relationship between the amount of noise or lack of coupling between two waves or 2 areas, and it decreases like it should. But when you use the average reference and you increase noise, it just drops immediately and just stays at 0. Because it's an average of of all the leads are being averaged together. So you've got 19 leads, you add them all up, divide by 19, okay? You don't actually have a single reference. And the Laplacian, similarly, it just drops and it does all this weird stuff as you increase the noise. So coherence and phase doesn't make any sense with the average reference. I mean, with the Laplacian. So that's why we use linked ears or one reference and not the average reference or the Laplacian. And so this is a paper, Self-Organized Criticality and the Development of EEG Phase Reset. And what we found was I showed some of this earlier, that it's 1 over F, which is an important function. I'm not going to go into details of that. And I mean, you got phase locking and phase shift is a function of the log. And here's what you see. What's the relationship between coherence and phase shift and phase locking? Coherence is correlated 0.86 with phase locking, but it's negative 0.86 with, I'm sorry, it's negative 3.386 with phase shift. So coherence is, so what phase shifting and phase locking does is it opens up the screen so you can see what is actually causing coherence to go up or go down. So it's the mother of coherence, phase shifting and phase locking, particularly phase locking because that is high coherence. If there's a lack of phase locking, coherence will go down. But phase shifting is just the opposite of what coherence is doing. But phase shifting is very important because it's recruiting neurons. So who's available? And it recruits those neurons for 200, 300 milliseconds, and then lets them, as they perform functions in the various hubs of the brain, and then it has another shout out, who's available? And it just keeps doing this, recruiting and mediating functions. And it does it dynamically, so because different resources available in a given Bravin area at different moments of time. Some of the neurons are exhausted. Some of the neurons are just not metabolically active. Some of the neurons are tied up with other things. And so there's a shout out, so who's available out of several billion neurons for each of these hubs. And so for those interested, you can read through this paper. Self-organized criticality is very important in the history of nonlinear dynamics. And I go into details of how 1 over F happens and how EEG coherence in general is involved in self-organized criticality. And self-organized criticality came about, imagine getting a bunch of grains of salt and stacking them and pouring the salt, and you create a mound of salt up into a little mound. And then you put 1 grain of salt at some point at the top of that mound of just built, and then suddenly the whole thing just collapses. That's that 1 grain. It goes all into 2 groups or 3 groups because it's that point of criticality. And our brains are actually, with phase shift and phase lock, they're approaching criticality, but it pulls back at the right moment of time. So we continue, and so it is a self-organized criticality because this process of approaching chaos and having a balance between chaos and stability is self-organized criticality. And it's important to have that, but we can measure that using phase shift and phase lock. You can't measure that using coherence or power or anything else, only phase shift and phase lock. Very important attribute of dynamical systems. So absolute power, coherence, phase, absolute phase differences, and phase shift and phase lock are really important. with average reference, you cannot calculate coherence and phase. It goes blank. Or Laplacian, you can only calculate these metrics. So you need linked ears. You can set these thresholds plus or minus 2 standard deviations. And either way, whatever though, it's a good idea to keep them symmetrical, but you're moving the negative Z scores towards zero, and the excessive positive towards zero. That's zero is where the healthy normal population is. And then, so Z-tunes is, you can use that with 1 or 2 channels. Let's say you want to use C3, C4, and say F3 and F4. And you can do that, let's say at F3. I'm sorry, I don't want to do that. No.
You hit the delete button on the bottom.
On the bottom.
A little up.
And so let's say I want to do theta and high beta. So you can select whatever you want. Oh, I did it again. And so you can tailor your protocol if you want. So it gives you some flexibility. It's a good idea to only do the frequencies that are deviant from normal rather than waste your time with the healthy ones. But now we can do 4-channel biofeedback. Just like we were doing. So there's no problem doing 4-channel biofeedback, okay? If you want to do 4-channel biofeedback. But it's really more accurate than if you'd used BrainDX, let's say, or even BrainMaster. Now, BrainMaster does have 4-channel Z-scores, but often they don't use Z-scores. It's always a good idea to use Z-scores. But the value of having NeuroGuide in this case is you don't have to be limited to 4 channels or 2 channels or whatever. You can do as many as you want. And again, if you can do 19 channels, now you can look at the hubs inside the brain, which are really what's important in determining the efficiency of function, the stability of the brain, that you don't get at the surface. Surface, everything's mixed together. You're not necessarily helping the hippocampus or the cingulate gyrus or the amygdala or whatever is not doing its job. And that's the advantage of 19 channels. You can be much more specific and target that part of the brain that's important. PTSD, the amygdala is shouting. And if you don't see that at the surface, if you just do C3 and C4, you're not going to help somebody with PTSD. Nothing like you can if you target the amygdala. Somebody has a memory problem. C3 and C4, the theta beta ratio of C3, C4 is not going to help the hippocampus. You're just going to spin your wheels and do 100 sessions for a year or two. But if you can go for that hippocampus, reinforce it towards greater stability and efficiency, now you'll be moving the person in the right direction.
So when you're talking about, hitting the hippocampus or the amygdala, are we really looking at the surface electrodes and like triangulating based on the neuroanatomy, which couple of surface electrodes in combination hit the amygdala?
All 19.
So it really is the joint effort.
Yeah, the way the inverse solution works, it's an electrical field. So you have to measure the entire electrical field, okay? And then you do the Laplacian on the field, which is a spatial factor. You can do that at the surface. But the inverse solution is looking at voxels, particular voxels in the middle of the amygdala, voxel in the middle of the hippocampus, and you're really working on it right in the center spatially. And so, because you have 19 channels, the sources are all contributing to the 19 channels, but the inverse solution is a special mathematical method that allows you to target the actual source because there's different angles. The source is coming from the amygdala has a different angle to the surface than the hippocampus does.
Right.
And it's really using these angles to determine where it's coming from.
And we can research.
And that required that they've 19, it's
It-
not just the, because you were sitting triangulating, I was thinking also that just.
Because I want, yeah,
But 19.
You have to have the
is
19.
essential For that inverse solution.
Yeah, it's called the electrical field. You have to calculate the electrical field.
no,
You
no,
can't,
it was a good
Yeah.
conclusionary.
yeah, and you just can't do it with 4 channels.
I'll use as many channels as I would like. Uh, But truly, if the cap's needed, then the cap's needed. And if we're talking about patient outcomes.
Yeah, the efficacy really goes up dramatically. Because you got shear forces with TBI and you got frontal temporal contusions and rotational forces. Well, you can see that and what you want to do, these hubs are dysregulated, they're not doing their job. So you want to reinforce them to do a better job. So every time they do the right thing, the DVD goes on.
Mhm.
Okay. And what happens there is the dopamine then surges out and it modifies the synapses to help repeat that state. The brain wants to be healthy or the person wants to get better. They have memory problems or facing a divorce because they're crazy or whatever it is. You want to help them. And that's the reason why there's problems in their life is because they have dysregulation in their brains. But if you want to do 1 channel, 2 channel, you certainly can with this. You could, it's the same thing. But we always recommend try and do 19 channels if you can. It, like we're saying, it really takes maybe 5 minutes longer. Put the cap on. You can see how fast that Sid, after you put your cap back on, I think you got her going in 5 minutes.
Or even,
Not even. I don't-
Not even 5.
I would say it's more just, like, obviously the caps cost a little more than the single electrodes, and I don't know what, my patients are so grouchy about the gel in their hair. One of the reasons I wanted to do this today. Sure, I don't know.
Well, you got to try to let them know that 4 channels are going to put gel too, right?
We just did a little paste. And paste it. to the
Oh, you do
spots.
put the individual electrodes on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, you can do that too, but it takes longer.
How would you use a system with just without a cap?
Yeah, you can't, not with NeuroGuide.
You do individual electrodes, put a paste inside the electrode, and that sticks to the scalp. Then you put-
Yeah, no, you can, and yeah, that's what you do, and then plug it into the amplifier, the head box.
Amplifier has a head box. This one does.
I was gonna say, well, mine,
No, that-
I know Brainmaster, I know Brainmaster.
Yeah, Rainmaster has the hole.
Yeah, and DayMed has there's a number of them that have
But
a head box.
I've got the dry cap, I've got a couple dry caps, the
Uh-huh.
Cognionics and that.
Yeah, no, the Cognionics gives you 19 channels and it's faster, but it's very important to use the saline because if the impedance is 1 gigohm. So if you put they have a method to bring that down, and then you don't have all that jitter that disturbs coherence and phase.
And then
They have the hydrodoppler. That's the hydrodoppler electrode.
Yeah,
It's a semi-dry spray with,
saline.
yeah,
You mean with the blue tips?
blue tips,
Yeah. That's.
So the Cognionics has addressed itself to the issue that dry electrodes have 1 gigohm input impedance, and so your scalp has little muscles going on all the time, and so it distorts the coherence in the phase. Whereas if you put a little bit of gel or saline, like Cognionics does or CGS, then you minimize that problem. Wearable sensing does not do that.
Zito does it, for example. They have their own disposable semi-dries.
Yeah, Zito is another manufacturer.
That's what Wabi has too. or at
Oh,
least-
Wabi has those,
Like
okay.
they're like disposable.
Yeah,
So there's a serious problem with wearable sensing because they deny that there's a problem. We could really show the coherence is just it's crazy. So now you're doing neurofeedback, and you look, so you can see how simple it is to do this.
One thing I would recommend is change the average to in max, because you're not actually seeing the leads.
Yeah.
In progress. It looks like everything's inside the ranges, but you're still having it
Yeah.
go up and down. There, now you see which ones are going out. You may want to lower.
So
that.
every time, and when they're like this, 4 standard deviations, 5 standard deviations out, then when they move in the direction of plus or minus 2, they'll get reinforced. But if they stay out here, then they won't get any biofeedback. But what we're doing here is we're using the Z-tunes. So if I go back, this is, and do all or none.
Yeah, it dropped off with the red line.
So you can see it's dropped down. And there's see what is being done here too is it's 250 milliseconds. When we look at this progress chart, these are very, very fast. But if they get within the range of normal in that 250 millisecond window or 500 millisecond or 750 millisecond, then you'll get the feedback signal. It's difficult to get them to stay for a long period of time in stability because the brain is always in chaos, stability. So on the average is what we're looking at for the Z-scores.
So in the surface, you have your positive and negative to when you switch it to all or none, the blue line or the negative, that also captures it to reduce the effectiveness of feedback.
Yeah, they got to be inside, at least have a majority inside here before you get the feedback. And what we discovered is it's unnecessary to have negative or positive because the sign is irrelevant because the brain is actually organized in loops. There is no beginning and end to the loop. What's important is that it's a bell-shaped curve that you're within the normal range. So what we do is we absolute those values. We don't, in S Loretta and SW Loretta, you don't have plus and minus. You don't need to. It doesn't make any difference if it's negative or if it's positive. It's got to move towards the center of the healthy population. So the valence, the sign is not important. And you can see the number of rewards, the percent reward, the sliding average threshold, the absolute value, and you can save all of these values here. And those are the patient's, goes in the patient's record. And that's information that could be relevant to the patient.
Is there anything that your patients can do prior to or following neurofeedback to help ensure its efficacy?
Does,
Like make it work better?
well, yeah, if they could have plenty of sleep, okay, good diet and exercise, combination.
You should exercise before the neurofeedback, or you just have
No, in general, lifestyle.
lifestyle?
So it's important for people to take care of themselves by exercising, by eating properly, and they'll have more motivation to do that if they're not depressed and not anxious. So you help them have better quality of life, and it's in a multimodal system like you guys have. You really make sure that they have a good diet and that they exercise, they get sleep.
There's nothing necessarily immediately or like in the hours prior or the hours following that.
No, the time of days.
Would deteriorate.
Yeah, well, it's probably important don't do biofeedback immediately after they've eaten, because there's a tendency to get a little drowsy after you eat. So if you can during the day, do 9 a.m. to 11, 11:30, whatever it is. Let them have lunch, and then you can start at 2 o'clock. I mean, that's what's ideal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any little thing could be
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah. It just you could do it at lunch, but they'll tend to be a little bit more drowsy. Not always, but there's a surge of.
If you ask them not to have caffeine on the days that they do neurofeedback, the same way you ask them not to for the QEEG.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea not to. These are little things that you can try, but really the dopamine is so powerful inside the brain, you really are moving the number and size of synapses no matter what. It'll be a little bit better if they're not drowsy though.
By the way, there's a question on the chat.
Yeah.
If you click on it, it's, would it be possible to also discuss how to decide on TMS coil placement and protocol selection based on QEEG neuronavigator?
The best is what Ernesto has, we're coming up with, but it's really not easy to do that. You got C3 and C4, but the exact location of where the gyrus is that you want to deal with is not well known. Everybody's different. An electrical surface, you won't see that. Let me show you a video. Of what we're going to be using in the future. I don't know if you can hear it, unfortunately.
Hello everybody.
No, we can't hear it.
I work with Professor Tashi at the Pioneer Science Company. And the location.
But I'll show you this. We will have this. Here's RTMS.
Now, the TMS is already in use.
And
what will be the outcome that we will use?
We will soon have this method.
It's exactly the same equation.
Now that's Ernesto is talking. You can't hear him, but he's has a bachelor's degree in quantum mechanics. And so, what did you say? Oh, maximize it, yeah.
What is the optimal location that the code has to be set in order to disrupt the nerve cell at the specific location
and so what
we want. And
what we're doing here is we can identify where the optimal part of the brain is, what gyrus you want to target with your RTMS and get the coordinates out.
How this will work to regulate using the applied
and we use Neuronavigator.
strategy, what's the best strategy to automatically compute the code.
And so unfortunately, I can't, you can't hear it, but you're welcome to go to our webpage, just like I did, and watch this video.
The take-home message is that with this,
so you use the Neuronavigator and RTMS along with SW Loretta to target, to move the coil in the right location so you can get the gyrus that you want to treat.
We then use our tools in order to complete the previous support treatment.
In this list of videos, you mentioned seizures several times. Do you feel there's an increased risk of seizure activity with neurofeedback, or
no, it's the opposite.
Use it to treat?
It's the opposite. As far as I can tell, there's never been an instance.
And how do you feel about seizure and TMS?
RTMS? I don't know the literature on that, but yeah, it's you can do a search in the National Library of Medicine doing seizures and RTMS. So I just don't know. Hopefully it's not a problem. But I wanted to make sure you can see, you can have different sounds. I don't know why I can't have them here. And as I mentioned, you don't have to use a CZ head. You can use videos. You can DVD players, multimedia player, and then the ANI streamer. These are really good to use. So this is a much more powerful tool than what BrainMaster has. And NX Link doesn't have it at all. And I remember when I was working with BrainMaster, I think there was 18 or 19 steps that you have to go through to set up the neurofeedback. And so I said to myself, I told Tom too, I says, what we have put together, you can do it in 2 clicks, 3 clicks. It's very important to make it simple for people to use. So it was very easy to do this. So then when you end the session, and by the way, you can just look at the progress and you can keep adjusting the Z-score threshold, okay? And keep moving in the direction. And like I was saying, that the best is, what I teach people, is to set these Z-scores real high to begin with for, whatever it is. So you give them success. They're not frustrated. So you make the Z-scores, make it easy to begin with. Then you start moving the Z-scores towards 0, okay? At 0.5 or steps or 1 standard deviation steps, and it makes it more difficult. But because you started easy, they feel good about it, confident, even though they're not helping themselves that much. And you keep marching down half a standard deviation at a time as you move them towards Z equals 0. And you'll see the number of rewards will be high, and then as you increase or decrease the threshold, you can say 4 standard deviations, you go down to 3.5, they'll drop down to only 10 reinforcements per minute. And then they'll start coming up, the brain starts learning, comes back up to 60 or 50, whatever it is. You then go down another half a standard deviation. It goes down, and then their brain starts learning. And you want to see this sawtooth shape. And that's what we demonstrated at ISNR when we do this, Joel Lubar and I. And you can actually see it marches right on down, the brain starts going towards Z equals 0, and in 20 minutes. It's very effective. You can't do that with these raw scores. You don't know what they are. You're just guessing anyway. You could be moving the brain in the wrong direction, or the brain's resisting because it doesn't want to be unhealthy. And that's why it takes 100 sessions. And then the limitation of 4 channels is that you're not getting at the hubs that are responsible for the patient's symptoms. That's why you always want to start with symptoms. If there's an attention problem, think about the attention network. Okay? If there's anxiety problem, think about the anxiety network. If there's memory problems, think about the memory network. Basically, and now you're specific with increased specificity. You can see how much it went down by me increasing the threshold. Anyway, whatever that was. So are there any questions about this? Did you get that better? Esther, do you want any questions or anything you want to cover? Okay, because you can show this to your the boss.
Yes.
Because this is just more effective, and he'll get more referrals, and everybody feels better by their patients getting better. And reimbursement can be obtained through if there's a problem, go to the Paradigm page on a website, and have the patient pay, okay, and then have the patient file the request for reimbursement themselves. And if there's a failure, then there's an appeal document. They can figure that out. It's a Word document. They just put their name at the top and send that in. And now if they are denied the appeal, then the federal government goes after the insurance company. And they have to justify it. They have to submit a whole bunch of paperwork to say, why they will reimburse, for an elbow that's been injured, but not the brain. And it doesn't, the parity board doesn't consider that an elbow is more important than a person's brain. Yeah. And then you want to save your neurofeedback session data. And it's a .nfb file, so you can always refer to it and you can see how your patient has changed over sessions. And show the patient, look at, this is where you were when you first came in, 4 or 5 standard deviations. This is where you are now. And you're down to 2 standard deviations. And then there's S-Loretta, which is good, but it uses a spherical head model, as I mentioned, but the brain is actually shaped like a loaf of bread. And so you're going to have some more error with it than you do with, by far, with SW-Loretta. But you can get phase shift and phase lock, coherence and phase. You can target just the amygdala if you want. Or you can go to the symptom checklist and load that in and say the person has an anxiety problem. Now you're going to hit the anxiety network. Whoops. And so there's the anxiety network. And these regions are going to be affected. Now, right now, you're starting at Z equals 0. So you're getting that, which means you're going to select all the hubs of that network. If you just want to look at the ones that are 3 standard deviations, then set it to 3. Now you're only looking at Bravo 13, 30, and left and right. And you're not worried about those that are less than 3. If we go to 2 standard deviations, now you get everything anyway. But if you want to just work on the very worst symptoms, it's these 2, 4 standard deviations. But it's a good idea to go ahead and get them all, put that to 0, because it's not going to make any difference. There's everything that is less than, you can set the threshold when you go here. It's 2 standard deviations. Anything that's less than plus or minus 2 standard deviations is going to be determining the biofeedback. Because it's the chaotic ones that NeuroGuide is designed to reinforce towards less chaos and greater stability. So out of the whole universe of leads and parts of the brain, it's just going to be those parts known to be linked to anxiety and those aspects that are chaotic and extreme and not behaving right. So you're going to target them. Those hubs that are helpful and compensatory and all that, they're not going to be the target of the biofeedback. Just the ones that are troublesome. And the procedure then is the same as I just did. Same, so I'm using the Z-tunes. So there's this pure, it's flat because NeuroGuide is calculating what the average was. It has a window that's moving. It's a 30-second window or something like that. It's moving and it knows what is, where the extremes are and what it should be doing. So it's trying to tune the brain up to get below the at least 70% in plus or minus within the range of your z-scores. And then the outliers, the 30% that are not at threshold, they're not going to be reinforced unless they're going in the direction of z equals 0. Actually, we calculate the slope of these. And over time, they've got to be moving towards in the direction of z equals 0, or there won't be any biofeedback. And that's another way that we differ from BrainMaster. They don't use z-tunes. They'll get 70% or 80%, whatever it is. And there's these other ones, the 20 or 30%, they could be getting even worse and still get reinforced. You really need to reinforcement if they're going in the right direction, greater stability and efficiency. And you can always change the threshold. I mean, whatever you want to look at. Now, just to be clear, this file that I'm getting was generated by NeuroGuide. After you did the editing of NeuroGuide, then you create the .scl file.
When they do that symptom checklist, does that show up on that automated clinical reports somewhere?
Symptom checklist does not.
it does
Okay.
No, where all you see there is should be a description of the symptoms. You know, this person has high anxiety, has sleep problems, and all that kind of
So
stuff.
that's like what I'm typing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all you need. And then you simply select the network known to be related to anxiety or sleep disorders or whatever. So you always start with the symptoms and select the network known to be related to the symptoms. And if you have any, you don't know which networks are related to the symptoms, then you go to the PubMed. Let's do a search on PubMed. That's the National Library of Medicine database, and type in brain networks and anxiety. And you'll see, yeah, here's the amygdala, and it'll show you there's billions of dollars at NIH went into linking these symptoms to dysregulation in hubs. And that's, now you're informed. You're really on strong grounds there. If you're in a court of law, the neurologist will, why did you pick the amygdala? And I said, well, it's the National Library of Medicine. It says, if you're scared, S-less, the amygdala is a problem. So that's what you got to do. And then they shut up. Some of them.
Our lawyers never shut up. They say shut up.
Yeah, that's true. And so you can look at symptoms, but you also can go to networks. I'm going to come here and just deselect those. Do it again. But remember, just so we're clear, oops, I'll do it again. To use the symptom checklist, I know SW Loretta and Emin likes to not use the symptom checklist, but I always want to have people use it. But you can go to networks as well. And now here's the default mode. We were talking about that being important. And sure enough, I mean, this person, well, that's at 0. So let me go to 2 standard deviations. And this person's default network is 2 standard deviations out. All of the parts. So depending on what the symptoms are, you may want to select the default network, and they may also have attention problems. And now you have attention and the default network. And click OK.
And will that now train all?
It'll train
areas
both.
associated with both those networks?
Yep.
Same time.
Yeah, same time. So you'll see that all of them are in here. It's a lot of them, but it will do all of them. Depending on which ones are deviant from normal.
Well, it's 200, right?
Yeah, 200 metrics. Now, often it'll be 1,000 metrics or more than 1,000. And that's okay because 80 or 90% of them are near Z equals 0. They're healthy. It's just that 10, 20% that's causing the problems. And you want to focus on those.
It would be nice to understand how to recreate this on the demo so that we can, I haven't been able to match you at where you are right now. I know you had to say something.
Yeah.
Do a file,
No.
that's
It's identical to what I'm doing. But let's make sure that we,
there. That's what
You don't have,
I see.
so you have to create.
you have to create what?
She doesn't have a symptom checklist file.
Yeah, you
She
got
didn't create it. so-
okay, let's show her how to create it.
Show, learn how to create it.
So we're going to go through that.
Memorize it. Create it.
Once you have an edited file, save the SCL, the SW, all the file. Yeah. That's the first thing I do once I edit.
So I'm bringing in the demo patient. Now you go ahead and do it. I just want to show it to people who are watching through the video. And what we're talking about is after you've edited the data and you've evaluated the Z-scores, make sure that there's no artifact, et cetera, and you understand the patients a little better, then you go to report and you if it's S. Loretta, you do create symptom checklist match. And so I'm going to say workshop. And it's to create a .NSE file. And now what it's doing, it's going through all of the networks and hubs and everything, creating one big file for you that when you do the neurofeedback and now see it's done, it's done. You're now ready to start neurofeedback. So I'm just going to select a .ng file. And now it's a good idea to minimize your screen so you can see both the EEG and your neurofeedback. I'll go to S. Loretta neurofeedback, symptom checklist. This is the workshop.scl I just created. Load it. And so now you want to look at anxiety, let's say. And now you can begin to do neurofeedback. You click begin session. Look at your progress chart. Move this over to the patient's screen. But see how fast that was? It's really fast. It doesn't take long to start with the QEEG, know the symptoms, make sure there's no artifact, create a symptom checklist file that you can import into your neurofeedback module, and then immediately begin neurofeedback. So it can take, if you get good at it, 5 minutes to put on the cap. That's what Sid did in less than 5 minutes. But Sid's been doing this for a while. You then record, 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes of EEG. You then launch you make sure there's no artifact. That usually takes 30 seconds to get rid of the artifact, or select artifact-free data. You don't actually get rid of artifact, you just select artifact-free data. You save that edit file. You then launch this program under collection and begin to neurofeedback immediately within 5 minutes, or say 10 minutes, because it takes some time to do the editing. Now you do 20 minutes of neurofeedback. So in 30 minutes, you can do an assessment and neurofeedback, a 20-minute neurofeedback session. And that's very common to do that. We do that, like I said, at ISNR. Joel Lubar and I used to do that at all the ISNR meetings. And then you can, if you want, if you got an hour, you can do statistics, compare the pre and the post neurofeedback and show it to the patient. Here was your brain before, here's your brain now. That's just a little added thing. Or if you want, move on to the next patient, because that's how you make money. But literally in 30 minutes, you can do an assessment. You can save the EEG also post. You'll save, when you stop your neurofeedback, you save that EEG file. So you have the EEG file before neurofeedback and the EEG file after neurofeedback. And it's in the patient's folder. Saving the data takes 10 seconds, 5 seconds. It's not, but now you're in a very rich situation with a huge amount of information on your patient, pre and post, all within 30 minutes, including your treatment. And now you can chart their progress. We have progress charts of how the patient's brain has changed over sessions, because they want to see that too. So you want their symptom severity to go down, and you want you want to see the brain stabilize too. If you can do both, then your customer, your patients are going to feel good about it. They'll be happy to return. They'll talk to other people about how great it was and how their life has improved. You get more referrals, so practice grows. All of that can happen. So, and you can lengthen this. Here's half a second, 750 milliseconds. It makes it more difficult. You got to keep everything within plus or minus 2 standard deviations for a longer period of time. But Joel Lubar does this quite a bit. But the brain becomes even more stable, because when the networks are not chaotic, they spend a lot more time talking to each other and not going like a unruly child in the back of a classroom. It disrupts everybody in the class. So the teacher will get an M&M, go back, say, Johnny, if you're quiet, I'll give you an M&M. So pretty soon the whole class is learning again. And Johnny is happy. He may not learn, but at least he helped the class go. You don't really care about Johnny. No, even Johnny will learn too, because he got rewarded with candy, keeping his mouth shut, because when he's yelling and acting up, he's not learning anything. And so again, the same controls here, there's no different. All of them have this same screen. The difference is when you get to S Loretta and SW Loretta, you got Robin areas you're working with. And so we'll end the session. You can save all of this in the patient's folder. And I'm going to close and then go to SW Loretta. There's cross-frequency neurofeedback that we'll have a lot more in the future. Both surface and Loretta cross-frequency. And so Again, the symptom checklist, you've already created that in NeuroGuide. And you, again, it's an anxiety problem or whatever the problem is. And now you've got your protocol. Click OK. Here we have phase, lag coherence and coherence. We don't have phase shift and phase lock yet. We had that in the Surface and S Loretta. And we will have phase shift and phase lock in the future. And again, that's so important because that is the allocation of resource in very brief periods of time. And you want that to be efficient. You want the brain to have the ability to identify available resources. And the more neurons per unit time that can synchronize and get things done, the more efficient the brain will be, less chaos, the greater the stability, and the greater the ability to learn and to control attention and to increase memory and to all the things you want them to do. But you can't do that with 4 channels at the scalp surface. It's really difficult compared to drilling down at the parts of the brain that are actually involved in the issue. So you can see there's movement disorders. You can get that too. Attention problems. With movement disorders, you immediately get the cerebellum involved. The vermis, the nucleus accumbens. So now you got a whole manifold. You've got the anterior part of the cortex, bottom area is 4, 6, 7, that's frontal 10. And then you've got the cerebellum, amygdala, and nucleus accumbens, which is the reward system. So you want these all to work together. Now that's our protocol. I'm going to click OK. And we'll apply and begin session. Again, I'm using ZTunes. So the procedure is really the same. The difference is that SW Loretta has 12,400 voxels. Okay. It is spatially more accurate. The center voxel is more accurate than S Loretta. And so it has more, it has cerebellum. S Loretta cannot look at the cerebellum. Roberto did have the amygdala in his first release of Loretta, and then he created S Loretta and he removed the amygdala because he doesn't believe you can image the amygdala. But we know you can. There's no doubt about it. NIH, there's no problem in looking at the sources from the amygdala. But you need more channels, and you need something, you need the boundary element method of doing the inverse solution and not a spherical head model. There's where the inaccuracy comes in by using a spherical head model because the brain is shaped like a loaf of bread. So we definitely use the actual contour of the brain. Now we use the template from the Montreal Neurological Institute for the MRI in our SW Loretta. Now, it turns out the difference between people at a given age and their MRIs is less than 1 centimeter. Our brains are really remarkably similar for a given size. And especially with the Tallaric Atlas, which uses landmarks, as I'm mentioning, the crossing fiber systems, and aligns them. And so proportionately, a large brain or a small brain, you're going to be in the center of these voxels no matter what, because of the way the Tallaric Atlas is built. And then when you use the boundary element method, which is the actual contour of the brain and not a sphere, and so you measure that with the loaf of the bread, you measure the flat part and the round part and everything. you dramatically improve the accuracy. That's SW Loretta, 12,400 voxels and a boundary element method of the contour to compute, to calculate the inverse solution. So the inverse solution is dependent upon the boundary, and it's dependent upon the angle of the sources with respect to the boundary. So if you got the correct boundary, then you'll be able to triangulate down to the source because now you have the correct angles. So that basically is how it works.
What did you select to get the nucleus accumbens in the movement?
I selected the, what did I? Did this one here. I selected anxiety and movement disorders. So cerebellum is involved in movement. And so this person not only has anxiety, but he's walking backwards all the time, which is causing this anxiety.
But I don't see nucleus accumbens on.
Oh, yeah, it's right here. Wait a minute. Oh, that's the ones that are not in it. Nucleus accumbens, left and right.
I got the amygdala and the vermis and the cerebellum, but no nucleus.
Are you using SW Loretta? Amen. Could you help him see why he's, I guess maybe the demo doesn't have it? He can't get the nucleus accumbens when by selecting movement disorders as a symptom. That's where it comes from, but also I selected anxiety.
Did that in cerebellar fear and so.
And it has habenula as well.
As what?
Habenula was not selected. Now, I was mentioning when the habenula suppresses the nucleus accumbens. Nucleus accumbens has the dopamine, the reward system, and that helps you make corrections. Drug addiction, for example, I give the analogy, if you go to you want to get some cereal, you go to the cupboard expecting to find cereal there, your nucleus accumbens is generating a whole bunch of dopamine. You open up the door and there's no cereal. Well, immediately your habenula is going to inhibit your dopamine. You're not going to keep doing the same stupid thing over and over again. You learn. With drug addiction, that whole network, so the two poles, the limbic system has like this U shape to it, and the habenula is the back of it, and the other node is the nucleus accumbens. And with drug addiction, that circuit is not going to work right, and the nucleus accumbens is going to be so hyped up that the habenula can't help it, can't suppress it. So, the addiction network and addiction centers, they do biofeedback on the habenula and the nucleus accumbens to try to restore that balance, because it's right at the heart of the problem with the addiction.
And is there a difference in brain networks involved in substance addiction versus other types of addiction like pornography or video games?
I don't know. I would not really. The difference is that's natural kind of chemistry. If you're really interested in sex, then you're going to be, but it's not a substance you're taking.
Right.
And or a video game, it's not a substance. But if you take a chemical, it locks in and it causes the synapses to actually change. And it's more difficult to get the system to go back to its natural state than it is if you have a boyfriend and you're really in love with him, but he's crazy, you can make a decision saying, I don't think I'm going to be with him anymore. It's a lot easier to do than a drug addiction. So, let's see, any questions? Because I think we're end of this session. And what we're going to do is, but I want to make sure that you understand this stuff and you can actually do it. And if you need any mentoring, we'll be happy to help you over the telephone or the internet. And make sure, because this is motor memory, really. You just have to do it a few times. It's a good idea to use the demo. It's going to be identical to actually your patient, won't be any different. And get that motor memory down so you're really efficient at doing it. And impress your boss. And so what we're going to do is take a break, and then we're going to give an exam to everybody. And then we'll discuss the exam and give you a certificate after the exam.
I know on your website you do offer the mentoring, like $250 an hour. Are those for the hours that you have to have to get like your BCIA or QED, or is that? The mentoring?
I guess you could use it. What you're gonna, there's on here, there is 16 hours for BCIA and there's CEU hours. Yeah, I think you could. We'd have to give you a certificate though. The question was, if we do an hour of mentoring, is that an hour that will be counted for BCIA?
You have to get certified for.
Yeah, you'd have to get it approved by, well, we actually, Applied Neuroscience gives credits. Okay, we could do it as Applied Neuroscience credits. So it won't be.
Applied neuroscience
I
credits.
just feel like you're not allowed, even if you pass your exam for your BCIA, you can't be like a BCN unless you have a certain number of mentoring hours.
Yes, but you have to do it from an approved BCIA mentor. Now, that's
I,
what,
I'm approved BCI mentor.
do you have the formal sign? You have
Yeah, I have. I've done it. What you do is you send me the form and I fill it out, sign it.
Okay, then we can do that.
I've done that, yeah, several times.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, because what we're really talking about now for Esther is we'd be happy just to help her get going, and if she wants it without having to pay. And so, because she, we're just talking about 10, 15 minutes to get her going. If she has problems, same with you.
I appreciate that.
But if you want a whole mentoring thing where we go through patients, you have patients and you send us the patient data and we put you through the whole thing and creating a protocol just with your patients and spend an hour. That's what a man does.
Oh, okay.
Then you can get an hour credit.
Very good. Yeah, I don't know why, the clinic that I joined back in September, we do neurofeedback, but we don't use NeuroGuide for our neurofeedback. We use a different program, but we have neurofeedback to do our cues.
Yeah, it's best to use NeuroGuide because it's the only one that targets the actual organ that's giving problems.
Yeah,
You don't get it at the surface. It's just not precise enough.
we sent some emails out,
Oh, let me,
asking some questions, things like that, as to